Hi, good evening again from Munich. If you're just joining us, this is the space segment of the conference. We just had a really cool keynote from Daniel Metzler, the CEO of local space startup and rocket company ESA Aerospace. We're now going into a panel. Basically, what Daniel explained is how new space rockets have really brought down the cost of accessing space. And of course, that is enabling a whole range of business models that were never before possible or economically feasible in space. So there's now a whole ecosystem starting of space startups, already thousands of space startups around the world. Some of them in business segments we already know, like satellite communications or Earth observations. But there's also a lot of business segments that many people may not know that well yet, like space tourism or manufacturing in space, or mining things on the moon or in other places, or edge computing, and many other things that we can do in space now, thanks to much lower costs. And we shall talk about these in this panel. The title of this panel is The Second Wave. No, that's not the second corona wave. I think we probably came up with this title months ago, is my guess. It's the second wave. What do you not yet know about new space? I have some really qualified and cool panelists with me, starting with the lady on the panel, Sarah Fleischer, economic advisor at the Luxembourg Space Agency. Oops, there goes my knob. István Lőrincz from Morpheus Space, a satellite propulsion company, and Matthias Spott from Cleo Connect and many other space ventures. Guys, I want to start basically with one question I would like to ask all of you because of the title of the panel, which is sort of the second wave of new space. If you look towards the future, the next 5 or 10 years, or pick whatever time frame you want to talk about, what excites you the most? What are we going to wake up with in like 5 or 10 years time? We're like, wow, I couldn't have imagined that this is happening, but this is happening in space and it's really exciting. Ladies first.
I think this is a very interesting question. One thing that really interests me and fascinates me with the thought that humans are going to go back to the moon, probably in 5 or 10 years going to go back to Mars. And that's really exciting. And for the whole industry, I mean, you've already mentioned it, the first kind of new space era, the new rockets bringing down the costs, enabling new satellite markets, especially in LEO. And I think these two guys will be able to mention that more. But these are one of the most fascinating things that I'm very keen to see in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
Great. István, your company provides satellite propulsion. Who do you think some of your main customers will be in the next few years, and hence what will be some of the big use cases?
We hope everyone, right, who is producing or operating satellites, because that's the key here, to make satellites be able to avoid each other, create a space traffic management. For that you need propulsion systems, and for that you need efficient propulsion systems, and also cost-efficient propulsion systems. So getting back to your first question, I think the most exciting thing that I'm looking forward to has already happened, which is a wave of disruptions. This was, I think, initiated by the X Prize, that was spearheaded by Peter Diamandis, I think. And that gave the whole industry the nudge that it needed to get into something new and create something new and get the vision that disruptions can happen in space. And I think the next one is going to be mass production. So mass production of all sorts of systems that are needed for satellites and satellite services. And of course, an infrastructure in space. So everything that has to do with operations, with edge computing and stuff like that. So we slowly move out into orbit.
Great. So Matthias, I suppose you being involved with Cleo Connect, and you can talk about this, is basically a LEO satellite communications constellations. You're conceivably a potential customer of István. Where do you see the big future use cases in space, and what is exciting you the most in satellite communications, but also in other areas?
Well, I think what excites me most is that we wake up in 5 years' time and see sustainable business cases. I mean, at this point, we are doing a lot of space still because of doing space. We all love the technology, we have great products, we're doing great things. And slowly we are also entering into our customer segments, but really blending space and the other industries, the user industries. That would be a really cool thing, and really creating sustainable businesses that then also would justify the economic growth that is all over forecasted. And talking about satellite communication, I mean, this is indeed something which is really key. I mean, we are talking about 5G, but 5G on terrestrial solutions is only covering, let's say, 20% of the globe. 80% will not be covered. So to have seamless connectivity in an industry 4.0 time, you really need satellite-based communication solutions. So basically all industries that have huge amount of data traveling around would need these solutions. And here we would love to see, let's say, more customer engagement and sustainable cases.
And of course, probably the best known company in satellite communications at this point in time is SpaceX's Starlink, which is right now already in beta test in the US, and they have around 700 satellites already up there of a constellation, which would ultimately comprise 12,000 or even more satellites. However, this is in the US, and a lot of the new space development has been in the US. But we're sitting here in Munich, in Bavaria, in a high-tech region. We have fantastic engineering talent here locally. We have fantastic high-tech companies. Matthias, I'll just continue with you. What do you think could be the European role? Where could Europe really stand out in this new space revolution?
Well, first of all, I think we could play anywhere. I mean, we have everything that is needed to do it. I think what will be very key to success is that we are really thinking out of technologies, products, and maybe even infrastructure. For me, new space squared, not to mention it, the second wave, would be really that we do see data-driven business models, applications, solutions, really for doing something to the customer or something better for the world. And so we, as Europeans, as Germans, really have to think out of this narrow area of doing technology and products. Really, let's think big. We can do it if we want to do it. And this only will help to have a sustainable new space industry in Europe as well.
But developing a sustainable new space industry in Europe or really anywhere is going to take a whole ecosystem, basically. I mean, again, we have the example of the US. We can see that where there's material government support, both on the civil side from NASA, but of course also on the military and intelligence community side. So I want to go through some of these elements of the ecosystem to understand what we may be able to do here to support the development of the European new space movement. So starting with government, and I'm looking at you, Sarah, of course, being a representative of the Luxembourg Space Agency, and Luxembourg has really been at the forefront of pushing new space in Europe. What have been some of the lessons learned here in developing a new space ecosystem?
Yeah, I think Matthias actually mentioned one of the key points. So we here at Luxembourg, we really believe in commercial space. So really thinking space away from government-funded systems. Like really supporting companies that have valid business models, that are data-driven, first of all. Data-driven is an interesting point because I assume that most of the VCs here in Europe they're not that they're quite risk averse. So they like data-driven companies because they're easier to be invested in. It would have been harder to invest into a company like SpaceX here in Europe 10 or 20 years ago, but things are changing, such as ESA Aerospace, which I'm very excited about. So from a government point of view, it is very important to move away from the role to fully fund startups, space startups, to really push them to think on a business commercial side, push them to talk to customers and not be falling in love with their technologies. But then also still keep on supporting them. Supporting them in the R&D phase, because it does take a lot of, I would say, capital to support the early technological developments. But once that is ready and the first MVP or the first pilot is ready, go and talk to the customers, make your first revenues. And this has been working really well so far in Luxembourg. So we have attracted very many companies already worldwide who are now based in Luxembourg, who have received a lot of R&D funding from us, where we see that there's a solid business case, that the company is not 100% dependent forever from the government. and growing. So we have companies like Spire, situated in Luxembourg, Cleos that just launched 3 satellites, so it's very exciting. And then we also need to separate. Space is so huge, right? So we have the data-driven startups that make early revenues, well, earlier than the hardware or upstream space companies. But what about the upstream ones? How do we support them? And here we see that companies still need to step in. They're still one of the key players to actually support them. If we want to support rockets, which we in Luxembourg don't do, unfortunately, but upstream systems like that, or long-visioned business plans like moon mining or space resources, space mining. This is something that we're very keen about in Luxembourg. And there we see that there the government has a key role to actually open the doors into that new industry. So you need to see space as many different industry opportunities, and they also affect Earth industries differently, with where the readiness is different. Like you just mentioned, Starlink from SpaceX, they're tackling 5G systems or internet around the globe. That can be possible. Like you can generate money like that now already, or 5G systems. That's valid business models. But building up infrastructures in space that you mentioned earlier, that's going to be a bigger role for governments for the beginning. Once you have a solid business model and can generate sustainable revenue streams. Yeah.
Actually, I realize we should probably open a bracket here, given that we are still at the beginning of November, and of course we just had a major geopolitical event, the US elections, and it seems like we will have a new administration, even though it seems like not everybody is agreeing with that yet, but it seems likely. So I guess one key question for the space community globally is right now, what would be the impact of a new administration? So István, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you're about to move to the US. Your company is going to open up in your office in the US, and I also know that you, in your most recent financing round, got some US investor, actually a US government-connected investor. What do you think might happen, or if we don't know yet, what would you like to see happening with a new administration?
That is a tough question. Okay, I will try to give you an answer. I think the direction that the US took on the side of the government with the civil programs and also the defense programs are very well thought out, and I think they should be continued and then pushed forward, because they create a wave of disruptions also in the government. For example, in their acquisition system, how they engage with new companies that have never worked with the government, and it's a big deal to engage with the government as a small company, because you need to invest a lot of time and resources in order to be able to be a contractor. And they are trying to solve this. So I think that is a very good example that is being set for the whole Western world, right? So I would think that it would be beneficial if even Europe would look towards those objectives and try to fit its own system somewhat towards that direction. So yeah, I think it should continue, and we have already read all the headlines that the new president is not going to push the civil missions to go to back to the moon and stuff like that. But I think everyone knew that there's gonna be delays and there's gonna be over budget issues. It's like NASA. That's their business model to do that. But the real thing is still the commercial sector. We have seen how fast SpaceX is evolving and how much of a disruption they created with their new prices, right? So they can deliver astronauts for the price of I don't know, a tenth of what was possible before. And that will continue, and I think commercial companies will go to the moon sooner than governments now. That's my opinion.
Excellent. And both Sarah and Matthias, you both mentioned, and now you, István, as well, the importance of really the private sector getting more involved in space, because we cannot be dependent on governments forever. Now, actually, beyond the US, one key example that comes to my mind is actually Japan, where, yes, on the one hand, we have had significant government involvement. The government has set aside at least $1 billion from memory to support private space startups. But we've also seen a number of large private Japanese companies getting involved in the space sector, not only by virtue of contracts, but actually by making investments, direct investments in startups. Just for memory, big companies like Marubeni and Mitsui have both made investments in startups. And so if we want to develop the new space sector more also here in Europe, I think that's something that really we should encourage here in Europe as well. And of course, we have a number of world-class companies across sectors here in Europe, many sectors of which are highly synergistic with space, like pharmaceutical, automotive, materials, and so forth. What has been the experience so far, and how can we get these big existing corporates excited for space? Matthias, I'll start with you.
That's a great question. I mean, first of all, corporates, number one, the big players in space. I think the first thing is very important here, that they don't believe they are new space. I mean, they very often request new budgets and think this is new space, but it's not. I mean, at the end, it's commercial space, startup space, whatever we want to call it. And I think it's the great variety that comes from that. And I think this variety of applications from space for the business of the established companies, and now I'm talking about the customer industries, this is really something which needs to come together. And I think we as new space entrepreneurs have a responsibility here. We have to continue and communicate what space is doing. Sometimes I would wish to switch off all space applications you already have, so that people will learn what is already driven from space, because I guess most of the operations of large corporations wouldn't continue. They would immediately stop and the whole business system would collapse. So I think they need to understand and accept that space is becoming part of their industry, of their solutions, whatever customer offering they have.
I mean, question to all of you, how can we as existing members of the space ecosystem, how can we help this process? Is it primarily an educational challenge, or what are some other things we can do here?
Set examples. I think that's the best way. Just set examples. The world needs always pioneers. You need to just better through all the hardship and all the naysayers, and just show them that it's possible. And once one person does it, then all the other people will follow. And I think that is our responsibility, as we heard. So,
when you're saying set example, you mean actual tangible examples of partnerships between startups adding value to existing corporates?
I'm saying that startups creating their own value chain and disrupting the big guys, right? So you mentioned that it's hard for the big guys, the old space corporations, to define what is new space. And it's quite easy if you think about it. You have a new space company if you don't have a whole department that is tasked to write proposals. Just that. If you don't have that, you can be a new space company, from my eyes.
Matthias, do you agree?
Yes, and I think the responsibility also could be lived like go out to customers very early. And you mentioned that already, was you said, but I would even start a bit earlier than that. Not just wait until you have maybe first prototypes or demonstrators. Really try to qualify your business model already very early with potential customer. That is new space for me, and this is really, really important to do that. And what I told my teams always is, don't go to space conferences. Go to the customer conferences where you find your customers. Tell them about space. Try to get a slot on the panels and speak there. This is important. I mean, going to space conferences is great. It's a huge community. It's always fun. But you don't make business there. You have to go to your customers.
That's a very good point. Like, one of the key things that I've found out from the startups that we have in Luxembourg is they always talk in space language. You know, like, I have this cool satellite that does this and this. But then if you ask the simple question, so what does it do? Or for whom? For which industry? For which market? Then it becomes difficult. The usual answer is everyone would like to have it. I'm like, no, business does not work like that. And that actually touches the same point. Like, it's really important actually to talk to customers from early on, figure out who your customer is, but then talk in a value language that you mentioned. Talk about what your service is without mentioning space too much. I mean, that's why I think a lot of industries are not aware that they're using space. I mean, weather data, that's space. GPS is space. The entire, I would say, export-import industry is using that. Getting across, the ocean, the Atlantic, where the planes are navigating through space. But people are just not aware of it because these systems or softwares or services don't talk space language. So we kind of have this disconnect between the space ecosystem and the outer non-space ecosystem, the other industries, and we need to bridge that. Like, I encourage startups to, stop talking themselves as a space company, but rather image yourself or brand yourself as what your service actually is and what your value is to what specific industry. I see space mostly as a tool if it comes now to usually satellite services. It's a tool or service that will boost other industries or increase the efficiencies. So that's one point, and the other point is education. People are just not aware of what you just mentioned as well. Like, if we turn off the GPS system, what will happen in Germany? Like, nothing would work. So that's kind of scary, and people are just not aware of it. And in America, you have like Amazon Web Services now with the Kupler project. They're setting up, their own cloud-based internet through satellites. What are we doing in Europe? We're sleeping again, or we don't have the startup yet that has that money, or the government that gives that money or that budget. But there, it should show us how important satellites actually are, especially in LEO constellations, the new space wave, the next big wave, and America has taken that away from us again. And this is, it's about time that Europe wakes up, in my point of view, and strongly encourage companies to push forward. Have a big dream, because the next internet through satellites will be mostly Starlink and Amazon Web Services. They will have thousands of satellites up there.
Yeah, I agree with several of your points there. Actually, also from my perspective as a space investor who sees space business plans every day. I mean, right now, the typical space startup is started by space engineers, and of course, there's nothing wrong with that, and you do need space engineers. But very often, 95% of the time, is a very cool technological solution and basically no time spent on evaluating product market fit. So I completely agree with you on that point. And I also agree that we will have to do more to build that bridge between space startups and the actual end consumer markets. By the way, is there any sort of tangible best practices or something that worked that you guys have done in Luxembourg, or Matthias, something that you know about that worked, or any of you? Because I keep hearing this, that we need to build this. I keep hearing we need to build this bridge, but then I haven't heard any like really good example yet of something that has really worked.
I think like one of we don't have best practices yet. We're still working on this, creating that bridge from space to non-space. I like your example to push your employees to go to non-space conference. I think that's the right way to go. And that's already very difficult for most space engineers. They're like, no, I want to go talk to other space people. Or other questions, like if you want to use space data, if you're a data-driven company, why do you need a satellite? Like ask yourself 10 times, do you really need to send out a satellite up there? Is it only because it's cool? Or is it really useful? And sometimes, or mostly, it's not useful. It's just because I'm a space fanatic and I want to send a satellite up there, because there's so much data out there already that companies can purchase, or it's even for free here in Europe. Yeah. So that's one question I mostly ask most startups. Do you really need to send stuff up there? Because it will just delay everything and you will need so much money.
I'm being told we have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask backstage, are there any audience questions we should address? Otherwise we keep going here.
We can. We can ask questions if you have time, yeah? So, what's the plan to prevent Kessler syndrome, knowing there's
Perfect.
thousands of new objects being added out there?
This is a question I was going to ask anyway, and I'm looking at
Okay.
István, who has brought up already space traffic management. So, of course, one risk that is being put out there to the new space economy is if we have some sort of catastrophic event, space debris event. I mean, we already had events in the past, the collision of an Iridium satellite with a Russian spy satellite, I think in 2009. But the more stuff we put up there statistically, of course, the more could happen. And just a few days ago, NASA sent a technical opinion actually to the FCC saying that a proposed constellation called Space Mobile, basically, that NASA thought that was just going to be too risky. So István, since you brought up space traffic management already, what is your perspective on the risk of space debris, Kessler syndrome, and how we could and should manage this?
We have started this topic years ago, actually. We've tried to push it and we fell on deaf ears. But luckily, as we so many times have observed, humanity has a lag when it comes to potential disasters. Look at the climate. So luckily, right now, the industry has recognized this problem, and they are trying to figure out a quick solution for this. And in my opinion, the only way to do this in a sustainable and efficient way is to have a centralized global monitoring system that and also a law enforcing entity. So these two things have to be implemented on a global scale. Otherwise, there will be always one other company who is not in that, and they are not liable for their actions. So that's going to be a big task that our generation has to solve. And on top of that, of course, the technological solutions like our propulsion systems and the controlling mechanisms behind that, like having AI-controlled collision avoidance maneuvers for a whole constellation.
Thank you, István. I hear we can have one more question from the audience.
Yes, we can. Here, how can space how can space will be useful in fighting the climate crisis? So, are there already any interesting solution to be mentioned?
Yeah, so how can space help climate management, climate monitoring, climate management? That's, of course, a very important aspect of new space. A lot of space activities have this positive impact. Matthias, would you like to comment? Maybe?
No, I think this is really an important topic, and not just climate, but I think all the sustainable development goals can be supported by space. I've once seen a matrix matching space technologies, applications to the goals, and you can see there is a full match. So it's not just for space geeks, it's not just for industries or private use, it's also for doing better in the world. So I think there's a great opportunity as well to support all these things.
There's also a cool local startup here in Munich called Aurora Tech.
Yeah.
So they detect, wildfires around the globe through satellites, and so it's great. And weather forecasting, I mean, that only works with satellites. So for
Great.
sure.
So this was the Space Tunnel. I would really like to thank my panelists again, Sarah Fleischer from the LSA, István from Morpheus Space, and Matthias from Cleo and other space initiatives. If you would like to know more about new space, I've been told I can actually show my book that I've just written on the new space economy. It is written for a broad audience. It's unfortunately only available in German, but if you do speak German, it's available in all German bookstores, called Hoch hinaus. And yeah, I hope we could excite some of you for the space economy and learn a little bit more about it. Thank you. Wolfgang, over to you.